Welcome back, friends. And man, do we have a lot going on here in Ann Arbor. The basketball team's humming along. It's hard to believe that we are in the final weeks before March Madness begins. We get the Big Ten tournament all coming up. Defend the block right now to let you know what's going on in Go Blue podcast. Post-game episodes from Lincoln, Nebraska. It was something, Mr. Bush. And there's more action coming on Thursday night with Rutgers. Sunday against Illinois, and we know there's a rematch coming at the end of the season. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, or maybe even next week. But so that's what's going on in Go Blue podcast. Now I want to bring in my guy that I already mentioned once, the voice of Michigan basketball, and that is Mr. Brian Bush. And I know as we are talking this morning, Tuesday morning, you were in Lincoln, Nebraska last night. It was, what was it, an exciting finish, but it wasn't necessarily an exciting game.
It wasn't necessarily basketball.
There was a round ball and a peach basket that was propped at both ends, and it was hard for either team to find that basket.
It felt like, the saying was there's a lid on the basket. It felt like there was a dome, a geofence. It was completely impossible to make shots, which was helpful because, boy, Nebraska's last two possessions, they got outstanding looks. And even the second one, there was only 2.6 left, I think. And for them to get a decent shot off was less than ideal. But, hey, a road win against a team that's probably still on the right side of the NCAA tournament bubble. It was big, even if Terry and I compared it at times to boxing, to UFC, to WWE. I referenced around halftime that, this is the most physical game that our friends in Lincoln will see this winter and early spring because the spring game's canceled out there.
Might be the most physical game they saw in the last calendar year.
Okay. Hey, they started strong last year. Once
they
got to that 5 wins, it was nerve-wracking.
Yeah, downhill from there. But hey, I do want to. So our listeners and our viewers right now, since we are on Twitter and YouTube, the assignment that you have of covering Michigan basketball and also doing everything you all see here, this is one of the many things that you do. That game last night was in Lincoln. It didn't get over until, a little bit after 10-ish. What time did you guys get out? What time did you get back to Detroit?
Oh, it was fine. I think we landed a little bit before 2. I was probably asleep by 3, up at 7, had to feed the dogs and the cats. All good. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We're ready to roll. This one wasn't bad at all. And Lincoln is a nice trip. It's a good spot. And that is a fun basketball venue. It's not, people don't put it on the same wavelength, obviously, as Mackey or Assembly Hall or Breslin in terms of Michigan road games. But that place was loud. There was just not a whole lot of successful offense to cheer for. It was unique.
Yeah. And they had one guy that, at one point, I don't even remember his name. I know you do. They had 29 total points, and he had 22 of them.
Yeah, Bryce Williams. Yeah. At one point, I think someone went to the line, went 1 for 2, and then became tied for their third leading scorer.
Yes.
Of all the games, it sure was one of them.
It was.
Of all the 7 from 77s, this is one of the best. By the way, this is episode 499. If you missed episode 497, that was our full offensive breakdown. So what we're doing here on this one, each position group of the defense, we did it 2 weeks ago for the offense, and then we had Chip Lindsey, the new offensive coordinator, here on In the Trenches, presented by Meyer. So check out that one, episode 498. Big 500 will be Jon and Wink Martindale next week. Can't wait to bring you that. But we had to set the tone, share our thoughts about where this Michigan defense stands. As we approach very quickly, you mentioned March Madness, also spring practice starts here in just a few weeks. So let's start on that defensive line where, let's face it, 2 massive pieces, physically, productivity-wise, all of it. We'll see Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, too, as Jim Harbaugh called them, gifts from the football gods. I think there'll be 2 NFL franchises very happy for those gifts coming up in a couple of months. Now, only a few well-known names remain. The leader in that is Rayshawn Benny, also buoyed by some rotation pieces from a year ago, Eno Etta, Trey Pierce, Ika Wuna. Transfer-wise, Michigan adds Trey Williams from Clemson, his 6th season, Damon Payne, a 5th year from Alabama. on paper, this is probably where Michigan has its biggest drop off, just because of Grant and Graham. It'd be that case no matter who was waiting in the wings. How, if at all, can that Graham and Grantless defensive front somehow, some way get close to what Michigan did in that front in 2024?
Well, I mean, I'll answer it with, let's just look at the recent history. It was Chris Jenkins, Mozzie Smith, and it was a young Kenneth Grant and a young Mason Graham. And we didn't really know, like, Kenneth Grant was on the freak list, but that's really all we knew about him. And Jim Harbaugh, talking about this guy who could, run fast, and he was big, and he's a gift from the football gods, but nobody really talked about Mason Graham. And now all of a sudden you fast forward a couple of years, you got a couple of guys that are playing on Sundays with a first-round pick in there, and we're talking about a couple of other guys that may both be first-round picks. Mason is a lock to be in the first round, probably a lock to be in the top 10, might even be top 5. Kenneth Grant, and he's kind of in the same position I was in, except he's much more talented, where the advice that you get is you're going to be late first, early second. And that's kind of where we're seeing him mocked, is late first, early second. There can still be some really good players taken at that time and throughout the draft. So, but my point is, you're churning out a lot of talent on the defensive front every couple of years, if not every year. And now you're looking, and you may not have the name Mason Graham or the name Kenneth Grant, but there are some guys that, when we've talked to, the defensive line coaches, Enoeta is a guy that keeps coming up as a guy that will be, could be a dominant player. And now he's going to get more opportunity, in the spring and obviously in fall camp. And Trey Pierce, we heard all about him last year in regards to how he is developing. Ike Awuna, same thing. And here's where I think, the defensive front is in good hands. You're going to have an opportunity in spring ball and to get every single rep. Rayshawn Benny, the leader of that group, and not talking about who are the best productive players up there, but he is going to be the leader of that group. And that's something that I've watched him do, whether it's at practice, it's in the weight room, it's in the meeting rooms. Really loved watching him grow in this program. Tough injury a couple of years ago. Now all of a sudden he was back. He was healthy this year, played really good at the end of the year, played really good in the bowl game. And, these guys are going to follow his lead in regards to, how do we prepare for Saturdays? How do we prepare for spring ball, summer conditioning? What are we doing? How are we getting with the offensive line? And I just look at the opportunity that is in front of these guys. They're here for a reason. They came because they wanted to be the next Chris Jenkins, the next Mason Graham, the next Kenneth Grant, and now it's their turn. They've got power, they've got speed, and it's really going to come down to just how much experience and how much of that can they put under their belt in this spring ball that's coming up.
Number 2 on our 7 from 77 to the edge group, Josiah Stewart. He's a guy who will be drafted coming up in a couple months. Michigan does get Derek Moore back. He figures to be a potential breakout star here in 2025. Remember, TJ Guy, the story going into last year, him waiting his turn, had 5.5 sacks last season. Cam Brandt, Dom Nichols, some young guys who rotated in last season. They figure to have at least the early advantage on some rotational playing time at least. And then someone to watch for among the freshman class, top incoming true freshman defensive prospect, Nate Marshall. He's only behind, of course, quarterback Bryce Underwood, and then the offensive lineman Andrew Babalola among the overall recruits for 2025. It does feel like there is some upside there and maybe some more known quantities at the mid to upper tier versus that defensive line.
Yeah, and you talk about TJ Guy last year. What did we hear from all the coaches? He's a starter. They just, he didn't get a chance to get out there in front of Derek Moore or in front of Josiah Stewart, but they viewed him as a starter. TJ Guy was a guy that we saw. I can't stop making that joke every time I say his name, but he's a dude that I think is really going to come on with more opportunity. Much like we talked about with the defensive tackles, you get more opportunity. More is expected of you, more that's put on your plate. Now all of a sudden, hey, you got to put up or shut up. And these guys, again, came here for a reason. I'm really excited about Derek Moore. And the more we learned about him last season, and I thought he was going to be a breakout contender last year. And he was really good. Led the team in pressures, just wasn't able to win the race of getting to the quarterback ahead of Josiah Stewart. So but I know that he was a little dinged up last year and wasn't able to necessarily do everything that he can do. He's got long arms. He plays with really good leverage. I like his speed to power. I like the way he uses his hands. And the one thing that I've talked about since I first saw him when he stepped on campus for Derek Moore is his initial couple of steps off the line of scrimmage. He's got great power, but it's quickness, it's suddenness when he takes those steps. Even if he takes those steps and there's contact, he is ready to attack that offensive lineman. And I'm really excited to be able to see him featured in this defense. And then you pair him with, TJ Guy, and it's not just like Ike, Enoeta, all of those guys. They're going to play multiple spots up front. And one of the things I think about Derek Moore is, yeah, he's an edge guy. That's where they're going to utilize him the most. But I do see him as a guy that can play multiple positions up front and really put a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. Sometimes they'll put him up against the guard. I don't really see him being, lining up in the nose. But heck, in Wink's defense, we saw a lot of different variations of how they're going to use guys up front. But it's going to be really exciting. And another guy that I think is going to take a huge step forward is Dom Nichols. He is an individual, when you watch him at practice, and he plays with a chip on his shoulder. Don't look at him the wrong way. Don't say anything to him. He's going to stand up to every single offensive lineman, and I like that fight. I like the fire. I like the energy that he brings. Now he's got to control it a little bit and use it to his advantage, but I think he's a guy that we saw a little in spurts this past year that I think is really going to bring a lot to this defensive front.
Have you looked at him the wrong way before, Dom Nichols?
I usually look at everyone the wrong way. And sometimes it helps. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it hurts really bad.
Not the answer I was expecting. All right, number 3 out of 7 from 77. Let's go back a unit to the linebackers. Ernest Hausman, Michigan's leading tackler from a year ago, back for his senior season, as is Jayshon Barham, who could be in this edge rush conversation as well. Seems like there could be some creativity, fluidity to his role. That's exciting to think about because of his talent. Jimmy Rolder, solid when healthy. Hope you can continue to get him out there. Georgia transfer Troy Bowles figures to be a key addition. Can this linebacker room be one of the best in the Big Ten? And does it kind of have to be? I remember hearing from Junior Colson. He always said that the defensive line took away tackle opportunities. And, hey, you've got big body stars up front that Michigan had over the last couple of seasons. Will more of that onus be on the linebackers now that Michigan is trying to reload up front?
Yeah, well, I mean, because you've got guys like Jadon Hood, who we've talked a little bit about every once in a while. Cole Sullivan, who I know that the coaches are really high on. I don't know. It's really hard at this time of the year to say it's the best linebacking group. I think they have maybe the 2 best linebackers, but they've got to go out there and play like it. But and I want to put a pin in that thought for just a second. I also think it's going to be the deepest, most talented group in the Big Ten. And now, if you can get guys like a Jimmy Rolder or Jadon Hood or Cole Sullivan to play up to the level that you need at that linebacker position, I think they can. Now it frees up Jayshon Barham to be an edge rusher in certain situations. They can use him, and I talked about it during the games last year, how many times he would line up over the center and basically be a stand-up nose. I'm not a huge fan of that look, but at times it was successful, but they can use him in a number of different ways. So if they can get other players at that position to fill that role, now all of a sudden Jayshon can be roaming around and he can be an absolute disruptor anywhere he goes. And I did some film review this past week. I was surprised at how many different ways and where Jayshon lined up last year. I know the discussion right now is he going to line up as an edge rusher? Is he going to? Well, he did that last year. Not exclusively, because you had TJ Guy, you had Josiah Stewart, you had some guys that were rushing on the edge, but he did, and he rushed in the B gap, he rushed in the A gap. I think he'll be featured more and more in some of those situations, but it all comes down to the depth and health of that group.
Interesting. You say Michigan's linebackers could be the deepest group in the Big Ten. I don't even think it's Michigan's deepest group on the defense, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. Want to start with the corners, and certainly like the defensive line, Michigan losing a future first-round pick in Will Johnson, but as we all know, Johnson didn't play much down the stretch, so we have a better idea of a post-Will Johnson world versus a post-Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant world. The likes of Zeke Berry, Jair Hill, they took some lumps. They also flashed some skill. Underrated loss, Amir Hall. I mean, he had some massive plays the final 3 games of the season. Of course, the huge interception in Columbus. And the Wolverines adding a 6th year from Louisiana, Caleb Anderson, and then the Arkansas sophomore, one of the 2 brothers, Tevis Metcalf. How do you see this group shaping up? It feels like this is an area where there's maybe some more unknown than other spots in this Michigan defense.
It's interesting you mentioned Amir Hall, because he was a leading tackler in that game against Alabama, and he was quietly maybe the most consistent. And the most talented was obviously Will Johnson, but he was only there for half the season. And Amir Hall, the addition of him really added to this to that corner unit. And now obviously he's not there. Jair Hill, really excited about the talent that he has. Now it needs to be focused and it needs to be more consistent. He's more of a gambler at times, and that's good. You got to be that way sometimes at the corner position, but you got to take calculated gambles. And I think having that year of experience, another year in Wink's defense, dealing with the coaches, watching the Michigan defense or the Michigan offense in spring, he's gonna and going back and looking at the film. Why did this work? Why did I take this gamble? Why did it not work? There's a lot to be learned from that, and he's taken on all of that. The guy that I was quietly, and the more I go back and watch film, very impressed with was Zeke Berry. And I was hard on Zeke in a lot of the game broadcasts. That nickel position, he was put in some tough places and at times struggled, and rightfully so, that we were a little bit hard on him. But making that transition to corner and playing man coverage and reading defenses, I think having that experience of being that nickel cover guy, moving out the corner, it's not an easy transition, especially, in week 6 or 7 of the season. But I was really impressed with him. And what I'm more impressed about is the conversations that I've had with him since the season, in regards to his determination to watch film and be the best player that he can be, not just for himself, but to be a leader in that secondary, for the corners, for the safeties, for that whole defensive back group. I really like his approach to film study, being self-critical, but not getting down on himself. And there were many times last year where, his guy gives up, it gets a touchdown, he gave it up. It's not always on one individual player. It may look like it, and you're always on that island, as a corner or as a nickel cover guy. But I just like his mentality. I like his approach to the offseason, and I'm really excited. He might be, and gosh, there's so many guys on this team, whether it's young guys offensively, and we know we've talked about Underwood the last couple of weeks. Zeke Berry might be the one that I'm most excited to see how much he has grown from last year to the end of the year, and now in spring ball, to get a chance to see him on the field. I'm really excited about that. And, I think there's a number of guys that they can use in a number of different ways. And we'll talk more about some of those guys at the safety position. But, I think the addition of Tevis Metcalf, I think that's going to be a great add in terms of the depth. TJ, his brother, as well at both of those spots. But Mason Curtis, I'm sorry, not Mason Curtis. What's the name? Oh, Josiah Edmond. We had heard from Sharon on Monday nights. We had heard from other coaches that he was a guy that just kept impressing. And I think, he is another one that I think is going to have to take some major steps. It could be a big time contributor come the fall.
Number 5 on our 7 from 77. Let's talk safety. Certainly an enhanced group because of the return of Rod Moore for his 5th season, the captain from last year who did not play all of 2024. And he joins a group of emerging talent from last season. Brandon Hillman, the heat-seeking missile. Mason Curtis, who, boy, I mean, you want to talk about a guy who just seemed to fit wherever they put him, however they utilized him down the stretch as a freshman. And then the other Metcalf brother from Arkansas, TJ, he was a starter for Arkansas last season. So with all the questions at corner, how valuable will this safety group be? And what does the depth of it allow Michigan to potentially do to help aid the development of some of those young, inexperienced corners?
Well, I mean, it's the experience of Rod Moore, getting him back. And I expect that I don't expect to see him at all in spring ball because they're going to be very careful with him, make sure that he is 100%. They know what he can do. We all know what Rod Moore can do. But, you know, he may resume that coaching role. He just may be wearing his shoulder pads and helmet this time. But just the threat and the knowledge of knowing that he's going to be in that secondary come the fall, I think is a nice little safety blanket that we all had as kids. He's going to provide that for all Michigan fans. But in regards to the depth, so you've got the experience with a guy like Rod, and you have the youthful exuberance, let's just put it that way, of guys like Brandon Hillman and Mason Curtis. Brandon Hillman and Mason Curtis, if you go back, and I would encourage everybody to go back and watch the Indiana game, watch the Northwestern game, watch the Ohio State game, and count how many times when those guys are on the field that they are around the ball or making the play. Those guys, when you're looking at football players, and Mason Curtis is a guy that they thought they could play just about anywhere on the defense. And he just has a knack, an instinct of where the ball's going, when to be there, and how to arrive. And Brandon Hillman, there are certain individuals that you play against, and you kind of look at him, you're like, yeah, he looks like a good athlete, looks like a good player. And then when they hit you, you're like, holy crap. Like some guys just have that timing, and they have that explosive punch. And Brandon Hillman is definitely one of the goals. And I think if you ask anybody that watched the Indiana film, and you ask some of those receivers or running backs, and they'll agree with you that he brings a punch. That is a great asset to have in the secondary when you know coming across the middle, or even if, hey, Brandon Hillman's not on me, Mason Curtis, they're not on me, but I know they're back there somewhere. You start thinking a little bit more about getting hit, whether you have the ball or you're receiving the ball, then you might be thinking about just, hey, I need to make this catch. Those guys are going to have a huge effect on this defense. And then you add in, the transfer in Metcalf and his experience. So you're going to have some great experience down back there, the youthful exuberance, really excited about this secondary and the punch.
You say youthful exuberance. Normally when you say that, it has a connotation of maybe being a little bit less refined, a little bit raw in some areas.
Well,
are Hillman and Curtis, they're not Rod Moore in terms of buttoned up and fluid and understanding every single move and motion and all that. Are they ahead of that curve even with that youthful exuberance?
Oh, certainly. And you look at the reps that they had last year. Mason Curtis, we didn't talk about him at all in the first 3 or 4 games. And then all of a sudden, he seemed to be on the field all the time, and he was always around the ball. And Brandon Hillman, it was simply a numbers game in regards to, because you had Makari Page, you had a number of guys back there, Wesley Walker, and that were taking reps that you just didn't see those guys. And then all of a sudden, you see a little bit more and a little bit more. And I say, I not unrefined. It's just they play with a different style than Rod Moore or a Makari Page from last year. And I know Makari knocked out the Ohio State quarterback, which was a beautiful thing. These guys play with a reckless abandon and almost they don't even care what happens when they hit someone. They just want to create as much destruction as possible in a legal way. We saw that from Brandon Hillman. Mason Curtis is I would say more of a cover guy than Brandon is about the energy that they bring when they're on the field.
Yeah, looking back, Mason Curtis really didn't start getting opportunities in the secondary until we got into mid-October.
Oh, there you go. Sorry, Brian, we lost you there for just a second.
All good. I was just saying Mason Curtis really didn't start getting any opportunity in the secondary till mid-October. You want to talk about an ascension from him? Pretty darn impressive.
Well, and that's what you somewhat expect from young guys. We saw it with Will Johnson when he was a young player. Like, when's he going to get his first start? How many times is he going to be on the field? When are you going to use him? What situations are you going to use him? And when you have young guys, especially in a position like that, you've got to build up some trust that you're going to be in the right place, the right time, and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so I'm really excited about what they bring, and the fact that they were able to crack the lineup, get more time as the year went on. It talks about building trust more with some of those players when they're out there.
All right, number 6 on our 7 from 77 as we're battling a little bit with John here on the stream. Number 6, it's
the special team. Sorry, Brian, I keep losing you there.
All good. We're grinding through it. Thanks to those watching live. Let's get into number 6 on our 7 from 77. Special teams outlook. Of course, a huge weapon for Michigan, Dominic Zavada. He's back. He's one of the best kickers, if not the best, in the country coming in. Tommy Doman transfers, so it is Hudson Hollenbeck, the man who got the punting responsibilities against Alabama. Underrated thing, but something to watch for. Both William Wagner, and then when Wagner was banged up a couple of years back, Greg Tarr, they're both they're both gone. Wagner trying to vie for one of those NFL spots. Tarr hit the portal. Thoughts on the specialists, and then any guys you have your eye on for potential returning duties in 25?
Well, the only guys that we really know about that have a history of returning punts or kicks is Jordan Marshall as a kick returner and Samaj Morgan as a punt returner. And we all, are very aware of what Samaj did in the Big Ten championship game against Purdue. And I'm excited about the opportunity for both of those guys. And it'll be interesting to how they want to use Jordan Marshall, or how much they want to use him in regards to, pairing what he does on special teams with what they expect for him in the backfield. We saw Blake Corum do both. The only comparison that we've heard for Jordan Marshall is Blake Corum. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him back there. I just like his aggressive nature, and Samaj, I like the confidence that he played in the worst back there. We saw, I mentioned the Purdue.
Still struggling.
That's some of where you are, wondering what is he going to be as a punt returner. Hard lessons learned, but as long as he's learned those in terms of when to catch it, how to catch it, and and when to call fair catch, I'm excited about what both of them bring. In terms of Dom Zavada, I mean, this is a guy that as soon as that's points.
No doubt. All right. Number 7 on our 7 from 77. It is year 2 for Wink Martindale in Ann Arbor. He
Brian,
will
I think
join
I froze
us
you
next
again.
week on In the Trenches. And John, let's talk a little bit about Wink and what he has certainly had a wild ride externally among the Michigan fan base, what he's brought to the table here for Michigan. John, how would you assess the first year from Wink Martindale here in 2024? And do you think for Wink, year 2 could bring with it a defense that maybe plays to its potential from the start of the year? Because boy, it was an ascension, but there were some struggles to start.
Yeah, can you repeat that question again, please?
Yeah, just how would you assess Wink's first year, and how do they make it a strong year 2 from the start as opposed to kind of building up to it?
Well, I think there was kind of a feeling out period, players to coach to players, and coach to the different style of the game in regards to what the college game is. And, some of it is different than the NFL game. It's becoming more similar as, every year that we go on, and whether it's the college game filtering up or the NFL game trickling down, you're seeing more similarities, but there are certainly some differences. And I think Wink really dialed things in the second half of the season, got better production out of some of the players. And, we go back to that first game against Fresno State, and we talked about all the different coverages and, the amount that the players were in man coverage, the blitzes. He was really trying to figure out, okay, what do I have? You learn that in spring ball, you learn that in fall camp, but you really don't get a chance to get a feel for it until you see it, in the big house or against any opponent. And I think there was a feeling out process. Now I think Wink is dialed in, and I think the biggest thing is just the players being comfortable with Wink, how he calls a defense, what the expectations are. I talk about expectations all the time, and I think those are they're going to be firmly in place. Guys are understanding it, know it, and they'll that's what's going to trickle down to the freshmen or to the Metcalf brothers who are coming in. And I think it'll be they'll hit the ground running this fall under Wink's guidance.
Wink is someone who consistently references depth. Depth, I think, is vital to his system, his approach, and this defense excelling. We saw it down the stretch in 24, and it feels like that needs to be the case in 25.
It does. And I know Jason Avant brought this up in regards to, it doesn't mean, he expects certain things out of the position, not necessarily the player. And when Will was available, there were times where Will wasn't on the field because he has a rotation that he likes to use, and he likes to have that depth. And I'll go back to what I was talking about with the linebackers. I think it might be the deepest unit in terms of linebackers in the conference, which will allow them to use Jayshon Barnum in a number of different ways, rotate those guys through. And it's really going to be about some of those young guys, whether they're freshmen, sophomore, incoming freshmen, how can they make an impact? How often can they make an impact? And how comfortable is Wink going deeper into the rotation? And if those guys come along, I think this is going to be a defense that is going to be fast. It's going to be physical. It'll be violent. And it's going to be, I think, for the 12-game regular season, might be better than the defense they had last year. May not have the high-end talent of a Will Johnson or a Mason Graham, but I think all those other guys are really going to do a nice job of understanding their role, filling their role.
Interesting stuff. Again, we will have Wink Martindale in a standalone episode next week on In the Trenches, episode 500. Can't wait to bring that one to you. Jon and Wink talk all things defense, talk about his first year in Ann Arbor, discusses the likes of Kenneth Graham and Mason Graham heading into the NFL draft process. So that's it for the audio edition of In the Trenches here this week. On the video side, we're going to have a few extra segments and conversation points as we stay here on the stream for a little while. I think we're worked. We've got the issue worked out, Jon. I think it was just the magic of internet connection, but I think you're good now.
Yeah, I think so. We should be. I mean, I've got the hard line in, so we'll keep rolling with it.
All right, sounds good. We'll obviously keep tagging along and let you know if we have any issues here. I do want to talk about on this portion what some of the rumors are and some of the reporting surrounding the college football playoff model, and in particular, the potential changes to championship week. Ross Dellinger of Yahoo has been, I think, probably the individual, the reporter with the most on this, and there have been others involved too, but the potential of a 14-team playoff and the most bandied about reporting around a 14-team format would be the flawless to say, rolls right off the tongue, the 4-4-2-2 1+1 model, which I hope is rebranded, which is 4 auto qualifiers for the Big Ten and the SEC, 2 for the ACC and the Big 12, 1 for the Group of 5, and then 1 at large. Like it,
Notre Dame exception,
and a Notre Dame exception. Like it, hate it. What are your thoughts on that before we get into championship week?
As long as it comes with all the side benefits that we've heard about in regards to the automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten. If you're going to guarantee 4 spots, then I think it is the conference champion, no question. And then it's going to be the next, however they sort out who the next 3 are. but we need to see the SEC go to 9 conference games. And so we get a chance to see more of the top teams play each other. We also need to see the crossover games between the Big Ten and the SEC. I want to see Michigan and Georgia, or Michigan, Alabama, even though we've taken Alabama the last couple of times. It's been kind of a lot of fun doing that. When you're doing this, Wisconsin, LSU, which is, we have seen in the recent past, I want to see those games. There's going to be 12 games, 9 conference games, but there needs to be other Power 5 matchups between the Big Ten and the SEC. So if they're going to sit there and say, well, our 8 wins are better than a 10-win Big 12 team or ACC team, then you better be able to justify it with strength of schedule. And it's good for those that are viewing college football, because the Big Ten and the SEC are the best conferences in college football, the deepest conferences. And it doesn't mean you can't have a BYU or a Colorado or Arizona State jump up and win a national title. It just means that if you're going to play against the toughest talent week in, week out, then I have no problem with the automatic qualifiers. Now, when it comes to seeding, it needs to be 1 through 14. Wherever you are in that ranking, that's where it needs to be. I don't want to see the automatic seeding that we saw last year.
So a couple things. I slightly disagree with that last part, but I'll share in a second. My question is, if this is adopted, who do you think, what entity leagues benefit the most from this 4-4-2-2 1+1?
Well, I think it's probably the Big 12 and the ACC, because they get 2 automatic bids instead of it being 5-5, 1-1, 1+1. However that math works out.
Or
I think I got to 14.
I wasn't writing it down. I don't have my TI-83 out right now. To me, if you had the SEC agree to 9 conference games, the Big Ten obviously already there, and you set up a Big Ten SEC scheduling setup to where basically what you would probably have to do here, because also schools want to have 7 or an average of 7. Michigan's in kind of the 8-6 ebb and flow right now. They want to have an average of 7 home games a year. So what this would potentially look like is the years that you would, if every year say Michigan every year plays 9 conference games and 1 SEC team, where you basically have 5, say the years you have 5 home games in the league, you play an SEC team on the road and then flip it. And then you'd have 2 bye games, right? This year will be New Mexico and Central Michigan. That's what you set up. If you create that,
disrespectful to call them bye games.
BUY, not BYE. Spelling, math, addition. We're doing it all.
Yes.
Bye. Sorry, that's more of a basketball term. I apologize. It's the bye game to say, we're welcoming you into our home with X number of dollars, and we are going to be favored by X number of points. I think if you set that up, the discussion around the 4-4-2-2 part of this is based on how often in a 14-team model these teams from various conferences will get in. But if you set that up in the Big Ten and the SEC, I'm pretty confident that the Big Ten and SEC would average more than 4. So you're basically hamstringing yourself to not potentially get 5 or even 6 if you go to more of an at-large model. I think it's wild that you are guaranteeing 2 ACC and 2 Big 12 teams when you get 4, but I mean, couldn't you get 5, maybe 6?
Well, yes, you could, but I don't think you'll get the Big Ten, and I don't think you'll get the SEC to agree to 9 games or to, playing a crossover game against a Big Ten opponent without an automatic bid. And nobody's going to say, 5 automatic bids. Now, here's where I think it becomes really interesting is championship weekend. And we heard the arguments about, hey, if you're, playing in that championship game and you lose it, are you losing an opportunity to go to the college football playoffs? I think 1 and 2, however you're going to settle it in your conference, and trust me, there will be weird tiebreakers, and it's going to happen at some point. But 1 and 2, they're automatically in the playoffs. Championship weekend now becomes a de facto extra round of the playoffs where you have 3 play 6, 4 play 5, in your conference, and the winners of those games go on to play in the college football playoffs. It takes away the threat of number 2 losing that game and losing an opportunity to go to the college football playoffs. And it gives, if you're going to say 2 ACC teams, 2 Big 12 teams, now all of a sudden there's a chance for the 6th seed or the 5th seed in either the Big 10 or the SEC to play themselves into a college football playoff position.
So I'm glad you said it that way. There's the model thrown out there that the SEC and the Big 10 could go to just a 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7. That to me would be awful. That would completely devalue the regular season.
Yeah, it's dumb.
And obviously, hey, if that was in place last year, Michigan would have been a 7 seed. I think we can all agree, as great as the finish was, Michigan was not deserving of playing for a Big 10, playing for a playoff spot in the whole course of the season. And I say this to say Michigan's going to be in a lot more positions where they're going to be one of the top 6 versus the 7, based on how this goes. Looking long-term here for 26 and beyond. To me, that 1 versus 8 is crazy. What I would do for the buys in the playoff is guarantee a buy for the top 2 ranked conference champions. Because that way, not only is there a conference championship on the line if you do play 1 versus 2 in a title game, and then 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5 for playing games into the playoff. That way, in addition to conference stakes, you also have the opportunity to earn a bye. And if I'm the ACC and the Big 12, I do the same way to basically say, listen, we're probably never or very rarely going to get a bye in the playoff. So instead of playing an ACC or a Big 12 championship game, I'd have your number 1 team get a bye in championship week and then play 2 versus 3 for the spot. That probably will not happen because the ACC and the Big 12 will want 2 games that have stakes during that week versus 1. But in terms of trying to position yourself to make the regular season matter more, as much as it can, while also creating more inventory for the dollars and cents, which I understand, I just 1 versus 8 is crazy. And frankly, I mean, who would have been the 4th best Big 12 and ACC team that could have absolutely beaten Clemson or Arizona State in the first round or in their play-in thing? I mean, you're setting yourself up to have some 8, maybe 9 win teams get into the playoff.
Right. And so, I mean, if I like being able to tweak championship weekend. And if 1 versus 2, and here's the other thing, these kids are playing so many games. And if you're the Big 10 champ or you're the SEC champ, you're going to be favored, and it didn't work out this year for Oregon, but you're going to be favored to be playing for the national title. So you're going to have extra games. And it's all a conversation that we'll get to when we're talking about spring ball and spring games and all of that. But I'm fine with 1 and 2. Hey, you finished top of the heap in the regular season. You're in the college football playoffs. Now 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5, it takes away, it accounts for the Indiana problem, where Indiana didn't necessarily play, when they played Michigan. Michigan wasn't that good this year. And
they got the luck of the draw in their schedule in the league for sure.
Sure. So this automatically gives them an opportunity to play one of the top teams in the Big 10 in conference to prove that they belong in there. Not that they didn't do it through 12 weeks, but if they have a schedule again where Michigan's down or whoever they're playing is down, but they play all the bottom feeders of the Big 10, now all of a sudden you get a chance to go out there and prove yourself against one of the top contenders in the Big 10 for an opportunity to go to the college football playoffs.
The other thing I don't want is 16. Having the number 1 team in the nation play the 16 team,
I don't either. But this is it. If you keep it at 14 and you go with the model that I suggested in regards to championship weekend, then you kind of have a 16 or an 18 team playoff. Sure. Because you're going to drop 2 teams from both conferences, the Big 10 and the SEC, and however they want to do it in the ACC.
Oh, it'd be more than 16. If you set up championship week like this, you've got 6 teams on each side playing. You could have 3 or 4 in the Big 12 ACC. You're basically there just has to be some mechanism to ensure that the meaningful games come November aren't 7-5 Arizona against 7-4 Arizona versus 8-3 Colorado.
Right. And so hopefully, I think there is a path to make this palatable. I don't think there's ever going to be not everybody in college football, that's college football fans, are going to look at the 14 playoff, the BCS, the 12-team playoff and be like, okay, there's not going to be a consensus like this works. This is exactly what it should be. There's always going to be people that have issues with it. It's too many. It's too little. We don't like Indiana being in there. We don't want to, the seating, all that stuff. I think you can take into account a lot of that if you do end up going to 14 teams, because let's face it, they're not going from 12 to 8, 12 to 6, 12 to 4. It's just not happening. If there's a better way of doing it and going from 12 to 14, but utilizing what used to be championship weekend, now play-in weekend, to include more teams, but then you refine the teams that are going into the college football playoffs. I think there will be more ways to look at it and say, you know what, our team had all the chances possible and we just came up short.
Well, if this keeps expanding the way that it has, maybe the spring games will just be the semifinals in the national championship game in college football.
Could be. I know that in basketball they want to go from 68 to 76. So let's just let in, a third of all teams.
If you look at the bubble in basketball and you want to add 8 teams, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
North Carolina's legit on the bubble, and they're 1-10 in quad 1 games.
Let's call it what it is. It's money. It's the ability to broadcast games, and we have to talk about betting, and betting on college sports, betting on sports everywhere is big business, and they want more games for those that bet to be able to bet on them. They want more games.
They want more meaningful games.
Well, let's not get carried away with the word meaningful. Yes, we want more meaningful games.
Yes,
but in terms of the expansion of the NCAA tournament, they just want more games.
Yeah. All right. Spring game. Texas and USC seem to be going away from it, and there are different reasons for this. We joked about Nebraska and Matt Rule earlier on the stream, saying that why would we showcase our players for other programs? Texas citing the college football playoff grind, which I'm a little bit more amenable to that than I am to, I don't want other teams poaching our players. USC, a collection of things. I think they've got some stadium renovations. I'm really curious where the spring game concept will go. And I think it's part of what should be a broader conversation about what the calendar looks like in college football, because that's, I think, something the NFL does really well, is that it's staggered. It seems largely sensible, and it creates conversation throughout the course of the year. Whereas it does feel like when you've got the portal going on during the supposed big time of your season, championship week into the playoff, you're just deflecting conversation in areas where it shouldn't be. Take advantage of the emptiness, right? That's what the NFL has a whole build up to their schedule release. College football should take some notes, and where that fits in with spring ball and spring game and all of that is a small but important component to it to me.
It is, and more teams that are going to be playing more games at the end of the year, further into January. I get not having spring ball or a spring game, and what does it look like? Because there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of individuals, and I'll just take my own experience coming in as a tight end, playing that position as a red shirt, and then making that transition to offensive line, a position I had never played before. It was vital for me to have those 15 practices to get out there. I needed every single rep and experience that I could possibly get, and then the opportunity to play in front of people in a spring game, because everything changes when you go in the big house, and everything changes when there's fans cheering for you, and you look up there and there's mom and dad and everybody, waving at you, expecting big things. Pressure changes the situation. And if you're not going to have any of those opportunities for young players that are coming in that still need to be developed. And I will argue that players going from high school to college are more developed and further along than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We didn't have the 7-on-7s. We didn't have a lot of things that are at the disposal to a lot of these younger players. But it's not the perfect answer. Just because they may be a little bit further along doesn't mean they're ready to play in college football. And so whether it's freshman and sophomore, freshman through junior, there are guys that develop late. They need spring ball. They need that opportunity. But there's also a need from, if you're one of the teams that plays in the national championship game and you don't finish until mid-January, and instead of having 3 months to prepare for spring ball, offensive, defensive linemen, linebackers, tight ends, they need that time for winter conditioning, to get stronger, to get faster, to work on technique, to do all of those things, because the pros don't need practice time as much. Now, you could also make it, the game may be deteriorating a little bit because they don't have as much practice time, but they're pros. That's what they're supposed to do on their own. For college athletes, you need more structure. You need more built-in time to develop, to be in the weight room with the weight staff, to be, to work on nutrition and fine-tune some things so that you could put on weight, so that your body can develop, so that you could figure out to do, what you want to do with this new body that you're working on. All of those different things at the college level need to be taken into consideration. So if it's backing up spring ball so that it goes a little bit into summer, and now you're worried about the academic calendar. I mean, there's a lot of different moving pieces regarding the offseason of college football. But I think what we are missing, if we're not going to have a spring game, not to have a spring game, fine, so be it. I don't care. But those 15 practices and the time in the weight room, trying to figure out that equation for young players as well as experienced guys, I think that's going to be the biggest Rubik's Cube to put together.
No doubt. While you were going through awesome breakdowns, I was getting ready to put up our comment from Dookie Pickles.
Oh, all right. Hey,
loving the stream. So
yes.
Thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Pickles. I couldn't stop laughing about it. That was
in the comment section, please. How did you decide on that name? I'd love to hear it.
David, who's a friend of the program, he just puts the money bag emoji when it comes to our playoff conversation. That's obviously the case. NFL Combine. Just what do you have your eyes on? If people don't want to watch the entirety of the Underwear Olympics, but want to direct their attention to something or some drill, some storyline that matters to you. Obviously, we'll be following the Wolverines who are there and hope for the best. We saw how the Combine can help things. DJ Turner running, what was it, 4.27, was it, that he ran?
Yeah. Lightning fast.
Yeah, that changed his financial situation.
That was my 20-yard sprint.
Did you say sprint or splints?
Sprint, whatever. I would try to get it out so fast just to be able to say it that I couldn't even say it right.
Hey, it was a good effort. But what would you watch for? What would you encourage fans to look at beyond just following and supporting the Wolverines?
Everybody wants to know the numbers of the bench press. Everybody wants to know the numbers on the 40, even the vertical jump. Like those are all, press clipping numbers. But if you're watch the position drills, because everything the NFL does is broadcast, right? And watch the position drills. Offensive linemen changing direction. Watch their balance. The defensive linemen when they're going through the bags. And there are some where, hey, they start on the ground. How quickly can they get off the ground? Those are all things that are directly relatable to what teams want to see and evaluate for football players. We're not track stars. We're football players. So a 40, like for DJ Turner, all right, and for some of the skilled guys, that matters because you want to see explosion. You want to see how fast they are. But I've always been a big component of, turn the film on and watch them against other college athletes. Watch them against, how do they cover? How do they, block? How do they tackle? All those different things. The general managers aren't stupid, right? And at least not most of them. and they're going to turn the film on and make their evaluations and then look for confirmation at the combine, look for confirmation at the pro day. And I would also say this, when you have guys that sit out, now there's different reasons guys sit out. And if it's due to injury, I 100% understand that. And sometimes it's a tight hamstring that you got in training for the combine, or it's something like that. But if it's just simply, I don't want to perform at the combine, I'm gonna go out and perform at my pro day, grow a pair, right? Go out there and actually do something and take every opportunity that you have. There's only going to be 5 guys that are drafted 1 through 5. And we kind of know in the general realm of who those 5 guys are. Past that, if you get a chance to go and show yourself like a Kenneth Grant, and instead of hey, you're projected to be a first, late first, early second, he's going to test well. He needs to test every time he possibly can and show that he is as fast as running down a Penn State running back, that he is as strong as you watch on film. And, you can go from early second to the end of the first round, and you can go from 25 to 19 simply because you were able to test extremely well and confirm what everybody saw on film. That's a lot of money. The difference between being drafted 25 and 19, the difference between being drafted, 37 where I was versus 26. There's a big jump in money, especially these days. There's also a big jump in mulligans. We've talked about this before. First rounders, you're going to get a ton of mulligans unless you just absolutely, you got overdrafted and you stink. You're going to get a lot of opportunity. The further down the list you go, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth round, you don't have as many mulligans. And if you don't perform on any given day, they're going to move on from you. So go out there and take advantage of every single opportunity. And I think that's what fans of NFL teams should want to see as well.
Yeah, I think Kenneth Grant has maybe some of the biggest upside in the combine of anybody nationally because of his size, his physicality, his speed for his size. So it'll be really interesting to watch him. It was really interesting to follow along with that. Sources tell me it was a basketball game last night in Lincoln. Did you watch it live, John? Were you following along with this and embracing all that game was?
Yeah, so it was my experience last night was I'd watch for 4 or 5 minutes and then I would say, damn it, a few other cuss words, and I would turn the TV off. And then I would be like, I can't take it anymore. I got to watch. And then I would turn it on and see the same thing. And it repeated itself probably 7 or 8 times until we finally got to the end of the game. And I wiped the brow sweat and gave a sigh of relief that we did come away with a win.
Yeah, I can always tell based on Terry Mills's reactions and how frequently he wants to kind of get into the broadcast. He was just in disbelief, and he had a couple of just, oh my gods.
Yeah.
Like as the game is going on, because it was the darndest basketball game. Roddy Gale Jr. in the full interviews on Defend the Block, but he's like, yeah, I that felt like a high school game in some ways. And
well, I like Rusty's comment afterwards where, he talked about if this was a beauty pageant, we would have been asked to leave early.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been over midway through the first half. I do think that the fact that they defensively and physically were able to get that job done compared to what happened on Friday against Michigan State, that was a positive sign. The reality is this team, it's gone from being able to say it's a small sample size that they've struggled from three. They're sub 29% from three over the last 10 games. That's a third of the season where they're shooting sub 30% from deep, to where now you have to start thinking maybe that big run in January from three, that was the small sample size, the outlier. I think the reality is somewhere in between. It's probably closer to 29% than when they shot 46% from three over a 6-game stretch. But, I mean, in the NCAA tournament, you don't always have to win the 3-point lottery, and it's impressive that Michigan's been able to win some of these games without doing well from deep. You can't do that forever. It's not a sustainable model forever, and they've got to find something. And I'll tell you, the one guy who I really am interested in how he closes this season, and maybe he can be the guy, You want to talk about the marbles on LJ Kaysen, he hadn't made a shot. He just committed a turnover. He's a freshman playing his most minutes in months. And he takes the biggest three of the game and drains it to put Michigan up by 6. I love LJ. He's a confident dude, and that was a confident shot where the context clues would make you say, why in the world are you confident?
Yeah. Hey, shooter's going to shoot, and they're going to shoot till they make it. And, so they can be streaky. You love the hot streaks, and you got to live with some of the down ones. But, yeah, that was a big-time bucket. And, I mean, basically what you're saying in regards to whether it's down the stretch here in the regular season, it's the Big Ten tournament, it's the NCAA tournament, your flaws will eventually cost you. And we've seen it for Michigan all season long. They have runs where they get up 10, 12, 15, 16 points, and then it's turnovers. The well-runs drive up from behind the arc, can't seem to score anything. And, those, unless they are fixed, and you're not going to fix everything, but unless they find a way to minimize some of those flaws, they will eventually be exposed, and that's what will cost them in the tournament. But it's not unique, right? We're not just talking about Michigan here. We're talking about every team. And I don't know that there's a team. Auburn, I know, is good, and Tennessee, and there's
Auburn and Duke are pretty clearly the top 2 teams in the country.
And but they're still not flawless teams. And so, I think the field is wide open right now. Probably more so than ever. And maybe that's just the trait of college basketball, college athletics, the way they're going right now. But if you could find a team that for 3-4 weeks can really dial it in, they could do some damage. Michigan has the talent; they just got to dial it in.
Well, UConn last year was an all-timer in terms of metrics, and they got the job done. Yeah. And I think part of what helped is that they'd won it the previous year and had a lot of returning players. So,
yeah, where's UConn now?
Well, I mean, hey,
the greatest coach that college basketball's ever known.
Yes. 2 things. Hey, I will not bury Dan Hurley and UConn until they lose. If you win back-to-back, it was kind of the Kansas City Chiefs concept around here. They didn't look all that great for much of the season, but they kept winning. What I will say is this. While the 3-point stuff has been frustrating, Michigan has gotten better turnover-wise. Other than really the second half against Michigan State, they've been around 20% or less in turnover rate the last 6 games. I know that's not a big number in a barometer. I get it. I'm not saying that makes them a team that's good at avoiding turnovers. They're not right now, and they probably won't be. But they're the engine of the offense, Danny Wolf, last 8 games, 2 turnovers a game. Before that, he was close to 4. That's improvement. So you cleaned that up enough to where it doesn't have to debilitate you and you have to play out of that quicksand every game. Now it's just here and there. Can you fix the 3-point shooting? And to your point, I look at the bracketology because I'm curious where Michigan could potentially go and what the potential first-round matchup could be and the travel and what day and all that. I eat it up. But once you get to Saturday of the first weekend, the seeding is thrown out the window. Look at Dusty May at FAU 2 years ago. He went from, I'm with the number 1 or number 2 seed in the tournament to, we barely beat Memphis in a thriller, and now we have a 16 seed to get to the Sweet 16. Seeding is thrown out the window as soon as the second round hits. So I don't worry about that. Don't worry about other teams at this point. Michigan's going to be in a situation where they, barring a real collapse, they're going to be in a situation where they're going to be either the favorite or the pretty close to the favorite to leave their first round pod to get to the Sweet 16. And then from there, they could face number 1 Duke in the Sweet 16. They could face a 9 seed. We don't know.
Yep. No, it'll be interesting. And it's going to be fun. That's what makes this time of the year so exciting. If you can't fix things, then maybe you just need to be a team that gets hot at the right time and develop that confidence. Yeah. It can happen.
The last 7 wins have been by 4 or less. Win games. And Michigan does it. And you hope it doesn't catch up with you. All right. Great stuff as always. No live stream next week. We'll be back 2 weeks from today. Here and there will be probably about every other week stream here on In the Trenches. And be sure to check out next week's episode. We got Wink Martindale. John, you got a final
I got
thought?
one last thing, and for some reason, my YouTube was not connected to the chat, but I do want to address a couple I would have done just in comments. But I know Marsky has asked this a couple of times. Yes, I will be at the spring game. I look forward to meeting you in person.
6 a.m., Mar.
Yeah, 6 a.m. Make sure you're there in the parking lot, ready to tailgate for the spring game. But yeah, I'll work on getting my chats connected as well.
All right. Well, yeah, Mar, that'll just be the low rate of 4 installments of $99.99 for that pristine John Jansen autograph. No.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, good stuff, John. We're looking forward to the Wink Martindale interview next week. He is always must-listen content. Y'all good, John?
I'm good. I'm ready to go. I can't wait for spring ball to get here. It's right around the corner.
Closing
just
in.
About there.
No doubt. All right. For John, I'm Brian. Thanks as always for watching here on Michigan Athletics and on X at Jon Jansen 77.